Edo Comic Club, September 2023. Disclaimer: content warnings/trigger warnings will brush up against topics including sexual assault, anti-LGBTQIA+ themes, events and slurs, and mentions of cancer and BDSM. DC Pride 2022: The New Generation. So DC Pride 2022 is an anthology book full of short stories spotlighting LGBTQIA+ characters with a full creative team of LGBTQIA+ people, from the writers and artists through to the letterers and editorial team. While the DC editors, including the likes of Andrea Shea, encourage that each creative team highlight queer themes in their work, it's not a requirement. Some of the editors' favourite stories are the ones that let DC's queer characters just live their lives as people. DC Pride anthologies also feature some pin-up illustrations, Pride-themed variant covers, and partially autobiographical written pieces on LGBTQIA+ titans in the comic industry. The impact of DC Pride is not just limited to the annual anthology. Andrea Shea, one of the main editors of this anthology, spends additional time outside of their standard annual workload coordinating with other editors across the DC Universe, or DCU, to ensure characters and talent featured in the anthology don't then get lost in the vast shared universe, sometimes by encouraging or arranging subplots and backup stories in larger books. Examples from 2023 include Nicole Maines, a trans actor who played Dreamer in the CW's Supergirl, a comic writer and activist, wrote a backup story in Harley Quinn's 2021 series issue 30. Other times it's about pushing the conversation for a whole DC Pride launched comic book series focused on a LGBTQIA+ character, like the current Poison Ivy comic. The DC Pride editors also try to make sure up-and-coming queer talent whose work impressed the heck out of them then get to work in the larger DCU. Andrea Shea's goal is to make sure the spirit of DC Pride is so ubiquitous throughout the year that the celebration every June doesn't feel like water in a desert, but just another drop in an ocean of incredible queer stories, characters, and talent that DC work with year around. So the way we're going to tackle this one will be slightly different from normal. As mentioned, this is an anthology, and that means there's a bloody long list of creatives, and I can't give full biographies of every single one. We'd be here forever, and I'd bore you all to death, and it wouldn't be the spirit of this anthology to not talk about them at all, so I'm going to try striking a balance between tight summaries of other works and taking a moment to give slightly mini looks at specific creatives with bigger impacts on the DC universe. I'm going to upload the document I'm reading from at the end, so anyone intrigued by a specific artist, writer, or character will be able to track down other places where they or their work show up, or alternatively just tune in to this YouTube video. So for each story, I will read out the main creatives and I will give a brief summary of the plot, and if I suspect there's a featured character that's somewhat obscure, I'll give some hopefully reined-in character bios, then I'll discuss and pause and open up for discussion for it to be talked about and what each story we liked or disliked. And we'll rinse and repeat. Any discussion of pin-up illustrations or written pieces can be discussed in general discussion at the end, where we'll also talk about our overall thoughts, and we'll also rank our personal top 6 of the 12 stories and why those ones stood out to them. I'm going to progress through the summaries in the order they appear in the book, with the exception of the DC Pride 2022 Tim Drake special, which we'll discuss just before we separately discuss Tim Drake's 2022 Pride anthology story. Super Pride, written by Devin Grayson, with art by Nick Robles, coloured by Triana Farrell, and lettered by Aditya Bidikar. Devin Grayson, she's one of the bigger names in this anthology book. Devin Grayson, who identifies as bisexual, was first exposed to comics after discovering Batman the Animated Series in her early 20s. At that point, she'd never read a comic in her life and didn't know anything about the medium, as they weren't part of her upbringing. But she watched the Batman animated series compulsively with her girlfriend at the time, who was also into the show enough to be amassing topless Bruce Wayne animation production cells. One day, Grayson walked to a local comic book store and asked to be told everything the comic book store worker knew about Robin, to which the worker replied to her shocked confusion, "Which Robin?" She left the store with an array of reading material, which I won't read out, but will be shared internally on the Discord. After that, she got her first job in comics by cold calling DC, not knowing any better, and DC's front of house admin, not asking who Grayson was or why she was calling, forwarded her through to the Batman group editor at the time simply because she asked. Grayson's most celebrated work is on the 2000 comic Batman Gotham Knights, featuring the exploits of the extended Batman family, the fourth major monthly Batman title at the time. They're also known for taking over the iconic Chuck Dixon's writing of the ongoing Nightwing series during the 2000s, a decent run overshadowed by two main controversies. One, the mishandling of harmful stereotypes about Romani culture, and two, the first sexual assault of Nightwing. Regarding that second one, Grayson mishandled an interview shortly after that issue came out, which compounded how flippantly the issue was handled in the fandom's eyes, especially with how infrequent it's depicted with male characters as the victim. The fandom's disapproval was loud, and the reaction overshadowed the other important story beat that happened in the same issue. Nearly a decade and a half later, in interviews, she has owned the mistake, talking about how the experience became a tremendous learning experience for her, both one of personal growth confronting her own prejudices and worldviews, and the social implications the comic issue had, but also a valuable lesson as a writer handling narrative. They also worked on the 90s Catwoman comic and the early 2000s Titans comic. Nick Robles, the artist, worked on a Sandman spin-off comic called The Dreaming Waking Hours, and has also done variant covers for 2022's Marvel Voices Pride, Nightwing, and the 2023 Tim Drake Robin series. They're currently the cover artists for Dark Horse's queer horror coming-of-age comic miniseries, The Oddly Pedestrian Life of Christopher Chaos, described as Invincible meets Doom Patrol, which I quite enjoyed the first handful of issues of. Synopsis. Bisexual Superman Jon Kent, with boyfriend Jay Nakamura and best friend Damian Wayne, aka the Fifth Robin, attend Metropolis Pride. Jon is the biological son of Clark Kent and was promoted from Superboy to Superman when Clark Kent, aka Kal-El, is called away from Earth for an extended period. Jay Nakamura has been having a keen interest in hacking journalism and activism, anonymously running an underground activist journalism site called The Truth under the codename Gossamer. Due to being experimented on in his home country against his will before immigrating to America, Jay has the artificially created metahuman abilities of intangibility that allow him to pass through objects and weapon fire and partial invisibility. The story ends with Jay convincing Jon to walk the parade as Superman wearing a homemade rainbow cape with all the different LGBTQIA+ flags sewn into it. For those curious to see the early courtship between Jon and Jay Nakamura, or Jon's early Superman adventures, check out Superman, Son of Kal-El by Australia's Tom Taylor, whose work has been featured on the Edo Comic Cast, and has also co-writes the current Nightwing and Titans comics. And Superman, Son of Kal-El has been covered in the July 2024 Comic Club. My personal thoughts on the issue was I thought it was a lovely message to the story, if a little surface level. Damian really gets to shine, his direct personality being used for comedic effect well, and the cape is some lovely symbolism, though personally I don't find it the prettiest, and I feel the design could have been tweaked a little more to be more aesthetically, visually pleasing. Confessions by Stephanie Williams, Megan Hetrick, Marissa Louise, and Ariana Maher. Stephanie Williams, the writer, pivoted from a career in scientific research when she became a mom to become a comic historian with publications for the AV Club, Nerdist, and Rotten Tomatoes. In recent years, they've written most of the Nubia-centric limited series, in addition to Wonder Woman, Black and Gold, Marvel Voices Legacy, and co-writing the 2021 Wakanda comic. We will not go into the other creatives for this story in any detail, but we have seen Marissa Louise's work as a colorist before in the September 2022 Comic Cast. They were colorist on all 6 issues of the Harley Quinn Eat, Kill, Bang tour. Synopsis. Queen Nubia reveals to her partner Io, a blacksmith, that the sword she made for her was destroyed in a wrestling match where she teamed up with Big Barda against Jadzia and Mama Mound, rather than in an epic battle like she first implied. Io points out she could have told the whole story when Nubia first asked Io to fix her sword, as Io would have been glad to see Nubia no matter the reason. The story ends with a reconciliatory kiss. Nubia has existed since 1973 and was DC's first black female superhero, narrowly beating out the Teen Titan Bumblebee created in 1976 and before Vixen created in 1981. Nubia's legacy has been heavily revised across universe reboots, having been depicted as Wonder Woman's long-lost twin sister and rival, whom Hippolyta formed out of different piles of clay at the same time, has been under the influence of Ares, has been depicted as the Amazon's champion immediately prior to Diana, and in the post-2016 DC Rebirth continuity, shows her as a future Wonder Woman picking up Diana's mantle. There were originally plans in 1975 to include Nubia in the Linda Carter Wonder Woman TV series, but the show moved from ABC to CBS and those plans were forgotten. There was a giant gap from 1979 to 1999 where Nubia wasn't included in any DC stories. Nubia has many of the same abilities as Diana, although with magical armor embossed with a lion's head and a magical sword has been granted a couple additional abilities. It's only since 2019 that Nubia has consistently been given the limelight, featuring more prominently in stories and limited series. Io has had small parts in Wonder Woman comics since 2003 as a Amazonian blacksmith/weapons maker that mostly lives on Themyscira and has been in a relationship with Nubia since January 2022. Also featured is Big Barda, created in 1971 by Jack Kirby. Barda is a member of the alien race known as the New Gods and was born on the planet Apokolips over 250 years ago. Orphaned at a young age, she was trained to one day lead the female Fury Battalion, a ferocious pack of warrior women. However, Barda met scot-free, aka Mr. Miracle, the adopted son of Darkseid, the tyrannical ruler of Apokolips, and sensing a piece about Scott, falls in love. Since then, Barda has rebelled against Darkseid's forces, has lived on Earth, and has been part of various iterations of the Justice League, in addition to marrying Mr. Miracle. Barda joined the Bad and Beautiful Babes of Wrestling competition featured in the story in a 1991 issue of Mr. Miracle. Mama Mound and Amazon Angel, introduced in the same issue, are frequently recurring members of this wrestling group. If you want to check out Big Barda's early adventures, I would suggest either the Jack Kirby stories, or alternatively, check out Ngozi Ukazu's Barda graphic novel. Giganta also featured and has been a frequent adversary of Wonder Woman and is frequently depicted as a gorilla who was genetically mutated into a red-headed woman. Her powers to change size weren't originally a thing in the comics, but an ability the character had in some of the various iterations as a villain in the 1970s Super Friends cartoon. Those growth abilities were then incorporated into later comics. A combination of her appearances in Super Friends, the Bruce Timm Justice League animated series of the 2000s, and the more recent DC Superhero Girls have helped bolster Giganta's reputation as one of Wonder Woman's iconic villains. Big Barda is also currently a lineup of the 2023 to 2024 Birds of Prey comic. Personal thoughts. While this story didn't overly speak to me, it was really nice seeing Big Barda and the Bad and Beautiful Babes of Wrestling again, as I've read the Mr. Miracle issue where that wrestling competition is first introduced. And as a weird side note, She-Hulk on the Marvel side in recent comics has started a fight club which has similar vibes to this. Think of Me, story by Rose Stein and Ted Brandt, letters by Frank Kovic, edits by Andrea Shear. Rose Stein and Ted Brandt are relatively new to the industry and a real-life couple that started working together as pencilers and inkers. They were very nervous going into the story, as this was their first time writing as well. They'd also had minimal previous exposure to Connor prior to being sent a bunch of Connor Hawke material by their editor, Andrea Shear. Brandt drew upon his own asexual experience quite a lot for the writing and showed his mum the story afterwards because it ended up explaining his asexual experience more clearly than anything else he'd ever previously communicated. Connor Hawke battles Music Meister while trying to write a letter to his mother, which serves as both a coming out and explaining of his asexuality. Damian Wayne provides advice regarding complicated family dynamics, his own mother being Talia al Ghul from the League of Shadows. Note, there's a reference to a Immortality Island murder tournament. That's a reference to the 2021 Robin series, which featured Damian Wayne's Robin with Connor as a secondary character for much of the run. Connor doesn't share ice cream with Damian, but they do share Korean barbecue at the end of issue 14 on a rooftop together. Connor Hawke is the eldest son of Oliver Queen, the original Green Arrow, and his former girlfriend from college, Sandra Moonday Hawke, making him Oliver's heir to his estates and the Green Arrow legacy. Connor Hawke first appeared in Green Arrow, Volume 2, Issue 0 in 1994. Connor's been a full-time replacement for Oliver Queen as the Green Arrow at times, and was a part of the Justice League at one point. The character was largely absent from 2011 to 2021 following the New 52 relaunch due to DC wanting to de-age Oliver Queen. It meant this Pride story had to do a lot of heavy lifting of re-establishing what was and what wasn't canon, and required a lot of interaction between Brandt and Stein and their higher-ups to thread those needles in a small number of pages while still telling their story. Music Meister was a character created for an episode of the animated television series Batman the Brave and the Bold, voiced by Neil Patrick Harris, and is featured in some tie-in comics set in the world's universe. This issue was the character's first canon appearance in the main comic universe. As a result, the writers Stein and Brandt were very grateful to their editor, Andrea Shear, for taking the reins, communicating with Warner Brothers Legal to get permission to use Music Meister. The villain was chosen by the writers specifically because they loved Batman the Brave and the Bold so much, so figured swing for the fences. It ended up being serendipitous that Music Meister's abilities tied into the metaphors in Connor's letter. The character has also appeared in live action as the villain in the third CW crossover between The Flash and Supergirl in their musical episode. Similar music-themed villains have appeared in other media, the Minstrel in the Adam West Batman TV show, and the Music Master in the Bruce Timm Justice League cartoon. In terms of personal discussion notes, in my opinions, shout out to Frank on the lettering. This is handwriting in a comic done right, legible, a background for the lettering that contrasts nicely with the letters, both the black on parchment yellow, but also the white writing on the red banner in the opening panel. The writing in this story is phenomenal. Asexuality is such a wide spectrum, so being able to distill such a complex spectrum down into such easy to understand writing is just marvelous. The art also has a Batman Brave and the Bold sensibility to it as well, fun and silly, while still very stylized. I can't rave enough about this one. If you enjoy reading stories with Connor Hawke, I suggest checking out the 2021 Robin series or the 2023 Green Arrow series. I also recommend checking out Chuck Dixon's Brotherhood of the Fist storyline on DC Infinite, 5 issues crossing over between Green Arrow, Detective Comics, Robin, and Nightwing, or Batgirl Volume 1, issues 31 to 32 in 2002, where Connor teams up with Cassandra Cain. I might also suggest checking out DC Pride 2023 and DC Pride 2024. Rose Stein and Ted Brandt. Check out their work on Images Crowded. They also worked with Marvel on issues of The Unstoppable Wasp. And also, as a final Connor Hawke issue to check out, Rose Stein and Ted Brandt worked on one of the stories inside of Titan's Beast World Tour, Star City, which is set after this particular Pride story, and is all about Connor Hawke having a conversation with his father, Oliver Queen. Up at Bat, written by Jadzia Axelrod, she, her pronouns, with art by Lynn Yoshi, who was an assistant editor at Marvel for a year back in 2002 before moving into design and art. The colorist was Tamara Bonvillain. Jadzia Axelrod is an author and illustrator who is also trans. She released the graphic novel Galaxy the Prettiest Star, and the titular character Galaxy became a secondary character in the 2023 Hawkgirl 6-issue series that Jadzia also wrote. Jadzia also wrote the DC Book of Pride, a coffee table book with DC LGBTQIA+ character bios. And yes, Jadzia's first name is a Star Trek Deep Space Nine reference. The colorist Tamara Bonvillain's other work includes Superman, Son of Kal-El, Boom's Once and Future, Images Wayward, Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, the current Batman Superman World's Finest series, working with Dan Mora, among others. Alicia Yeoh is forced into a fight with Killer Moth using a mix of Muay Thai skills and a baseball bat when a wounded Barbara Gordon, aka Batgirl, approaches her for help. Barbara uses Alyssa to assist her and take her to Barbara's secret base inside the Gotham Clock Tower. The story ends with Alyssa feeling re-energized to take on new fights and challenges. In terms of my personal thoughts, I really enjoyed the story. It was simple, but I loved the art. I loved the inner monologue. It all gelled really well. A World Kept Just for Me, written by Alyssa Wong, they them pronouns, with art by W. Scott Forbes. Alyssa identifies as queer and non-binary and uses they them pronouns. They have written Marvel's Star Wars, Dr. Aphra comics since 2020, the 2022 Deadpool series. In 2024, for Marvel, they'll be writing the Psylocke ongoing series, and for DC, they are co-creator of Xanthi Zhao, aka the Envoy, in DC's Spirit World, DC's first series starring a non-binary protagonist, and I can't recommend Spirit World enough. I've purchased all the issues, impeccable writing and artwork, and we will be covering Xanthi's stories in DC's Spirit World for the November 2024 Comic Club. W. Scott Forbes is an art director illustrator and designer working in the animation and comic book industry. He has worked on projects like Craig of the Creek, Paw Patrol, Ever After High, and many others. He also provides illustration work to Marvel, DC, and several other publishers. Jackson Hyde, aka the second Aqualad and third Aquaman, is the son of Black Manta and the Zebellian rebel Lucia. Jackson is openly gay. Jackson has a complicated comic history. Basically, there was a right-hand man of Black Mantas called Kal Durham in the 1977 Adventure Comics who had gills surgically implanted in order to fight Atlanteans. When creating the Young Justice television series, showrunners Greg Weisman and Brendan Vietti used the character as inspiration to create Kal-El, aka Aqualad, a ward of Aquamans whose mysterious father was revealed to be Black Manta. The same year Young Justice was getting produced, Jeff Johns was reinventing the Aquaman universe in a comic event called Brightest Day and decided to take the core concept of Young Justice's Aqualad and give him an entirely new history. Because comics takes less time to be produced than animated shows, the comic introducing comics' Jackson Hyde's Aqualad debuted first. Additionally, both Jackson Hyde and Kal Durham in these early years had a female love interest. Then DC 52 Universe rebooted and saw Jackson Hyde's version vanish as Curry's Aquaman was de-aged, and Young Justice ending with Season 2 in early 2013. Aqualad didn't reappear again until after the DC Rebirth event reintroduced Jackson Hyde, who was depicted for the first time as a closeted gay young man living under his mother's roof. Young Justice was uncancelled, returning in 2019 with a 2-year time skip from the prior season. While Jackson was afforded the luxury of a reboot, Calder's own story was required to press onward. And so this version of Aqualad was given a new boyfriend, a young Atlantean named Windy, after an Aryan of Atlantis character just as obscure as Kal Durham, if not more so, now presenting Calder as bisexual. Jackson and Hawia go on a date, showing each other their worlds. Hawia's large family underwater in the Atlantean kingdom of Zebel in the Bermuda Triangle, and Jackson's more solitary experience in the very dry desert of New Mexico. Because Jackson's mum hid Jackson from his heritage for most of his life, he feels a disconnect from the underwater Atlantean communities. Additionally, Jackson discusses ways he had to present as normal that went against his identity. Jackson Hyde ends the story by saying he's not going to hide who he is from the world any longer, and he wants to continue fighting and figuring out who he is. In my personal thoughts of this story, the art and colouring in this story is insanely good. The juxtaposition of the cool colours and underwater visibility haze versus the hot desert haze was amazing. I also loved the dialogue. Mum didn't want me to do anything that might attract attention. She just wanted me to be normal, unassuming, human, straight, to which Hawia responds, "You are normal, Jackson. You're weird and brilliant, brave and kind, and I love that about you." Just perfect dialogue. The Gumshoe in Green, a Far Sector mystery. Written by Tini Howard, art by Evan Cagle. Tini Howard is another big name in the comic book writing industry. She is best known for her work on X-Men titles, namely the House of X era Excalibur run, as well as Boom Studios' Power Ranger titles. Since late 2021, she has written the Catwoman comic book, and since 2023, the main Harley Quinn book at DC Comics, starting with issue 39. Tini describes this story as a little bit Blade Runner, a little bit Incal, and a whole lot of queer space detective energy. In the city, enduring in a far, far sector, are 3 species, the Karnhas, the Na, and the Ker-Tapli, which have only recently stopped having their emotions repressed. Sojourner Joe Mullein is hired to find out if a client's husband is cheating on them. After tailing the husband for a time, it turns out the case is a setup and the couple like being watched and want to hook up with Joe because of her combined willpower being a Green Lantern, willpower powers a ring, and being bisexual. This brushes up against the old offensive stereotype that bisexual people, being attracted to both males and females, must be randy all the time and want to get it on with everybody, and the only thing that stops them is willpower. Joe corrects them of this ill-conceived assumption. Joe then stumbles across a person that makes color flood back into Joe's world. If you love the idea of a space cop detective, check out Far Sector, written by sci-fi author N.K. Jemisin, with very beautiful art by Jamal Campbell. I thought the comment that, my personal thoughts on this story were, I thought the comment that triggers Joe's rightfully angry outburst was a tad confusingly written. Like my brain had to back infer some stuff once Joe did that monologue. But the black and white noir aesthetic, besides the green ring was great. The color coming in when the right person showed up for Joe was great, and the aesthetic of it all was just great. Public Display of Electromagnetism by Greg Lockhart with art by Giulio Macchione. Ray Terrell, aka the Ray, with help from Vixen, Michael Cho's The Atom, and Black Canary, and Killer Frost takes on the Shadow Thief. The modern version of the Ray had, from his introduction, this abusive background where he was literally locked away in the dark. At the time, the character wasn't intended to be gay or queer in any capacity, but it was handy for this story for them to offer an extra layer of Ray Terrell having difficulty showing displays of affection to his boyfriend, tech guru Xenos. The author Greg Lockhart has mentioned the only creative boundaries were to fit somewhere in the continuity of the lineup of this Justice League lineup. Andrea Shear, the editor, and Greg discussed taking advantage of the Pride anthology to explore that Ray and his partner had not been affectionate within the pages of the Justice League comic, in part because, it's a teen book, and those personal moments aren't always the easiest to fit into those big books, but the whole simple idea was to give Ray a kiss. My personal thoughts on this one was that I love the art in this story, although the whole light/dark thing was personally a little too Kingdom Hearts level dramatic for me. Bats in the Cradle by Stephanie Phillips with art by Samantha Dodge, colors by Marissa Louise. Batwoman saves her kidnapped dad, who has a military background, from a bunch of thugs. The story is told from his perspective as he reflects on how being a father has made him a better, more accepting person. So Kate Kane is one of several Batwomans that has appeared in comics over the years, but has pretty consistently been the primary Batwoman since 2006 and has been described as the highest profile gay superhero to appear in DC published stories. This version of Batwoman was created because DC editorial in 2006, after discussions were had about putting Barbara Gordon back in the Batgirl costume, decided not to have Barbara Gordon leave the wheelchair because Oracle was one of the few prominent disabled characters DC had at the time. Keep in mind they would retcon Barbara out of the chair just 5 years later in 2011. Before giving DC too much credit, it's also worth noting that in 2013, the co-authors of the Batwoman book left the first run of Kate's Batwoman book because of editorial interference, including being told by Dan DiDio they weren't allowed to show Kate and love interest Detective Maggie Sawyer getting married because heroes shouldn't have happy personal lives. Kate's father, Jacob Kane, has been part of multiple American military organizations and off-the-books projects from the US Army to Colony and the Murder of Crows. He often has ideological conflicts with the rest of the Bat family, being okay with using lethal force, and his actions from the 2016 Detective Comics were adapted for the Gotham Knights video game. My personal thoughts on this story were that Batwoman's outfit always sticks out distinctively in comic panels and continues to do so here. I wouldn't call this story my favorite of the anthology, though. I personally felt it a little weird to be using a story in a Pride anthology to tell a story from a straight person's perspective. Batwoman Elegy, or Batwoman 2011, the New 52 era, are good stories to read if wanting more Kate Kane Batwoman. DC Pride Tim Drake Special Number 1. Collecting the Tim Drake stories from the Bat family-centric anthology comic Batman Urban Legends, issues 4 to 6 and issue 10, and concludes with a brand new story to celebrate Pride Month. Some of Our Parts by Meghan Fitzmartin, with penciling/inking by Belen Ortega and colorist Alejandro Sanchez. So Meghan Fitzmartin went on to be the writer to both sequels to this collection of Tim Drake stories, Dark Crisis Young Justice and Tim Drake Robin 2022, which ran for a total of 10 issues. Tim Drake is the third person to have held the mantle of Robin. They aren't as agile as Dick Grayson, nor are they as strong a fighter as the other Robins, but he fights smarter, not harder, to make up for it. He takes to the detective aspect of the job better than the others, having worked out Batman's identity before becoming Robin. He probably has the best computer skills after Barbara Gordon in the Bat family. He's arguably the most selfless and compassionate of the Robins, having originally put on the Robin costume because Batman needs a Robin, not because he wanted to be Robin. A central inner question that recurringly faces Tim is, where does he fit into the world? Tim seems like the most likely of the Robins to walk away from the mantle and indeed superheroing in order to do contributing to improving the world in other ways. In The Sum of Our Parts, Tim has deferred from starting university and broken up with Stephanie Brown, aka Spoiler, aka Batgirl, aka the former, for a really brief period of time, fourth Robin. He is working 12 seemingly connected missing persons cases, and one of the kids texted a information source Tim shakes down by going by the name the Chaos Monster. Tim clocks off to meet an old friend and former classmate while wearing Dick Grayson's old clothes. The friend in question is Bernard Dowd. Bernard Dowd was created by Bill Wilmingham and Rick Mays, first appearing in Robin Volume 2, issues 121. However, that Bernard had a completely different personality, being both a bit of a conspiracy theorist and being overtly attracted to women, including loudly talking to Tim about how attractive Tim's then stepmother, Dana Winters Drake, apparently was. Two universe reboots later, this is a largely fresh take on the character and a great jumping on point. While catching up, largely focused on Tim's life, what's life like having been adopted by Bruce Wayne, etc., which is largely in line with the pre-52 universe reboot comic timeline. The waiter is murdered by chaos, Bernard is kidnapped, and Tim is knocked out with chloroform powder. After days of investigating, aided by Detective Williams, Tim, in his civilian identity, lets himself be kidnapped by the pain cult called the Children of Dionysus, whom he suspects is holding Bernard. He lets his status as the rich adopted son of Bruce Wayne speak for itself, and the members of the pain cult incorrectly psychoanalyze him as a bored, lost, rich kid with no drive. Tim has worked out multiple members of the cult are taking on the mantle of the Chaos Monster, leading to different MOs. Tim escapes captivity with clues as to where Bernard is. Additionally, Tim's inner monologue indicates he feels lost and unsure of who he is in the larger scope of Tim's life. Tim locates the base of the cult and rescues Bernard from the sacrificial altar he is tied to. Bernard, who is a fan of Robin's, notices that Robin is off-kilter emotionally. Bernard tells Robin that he doesn't have to fight on his own, having trained in martial arts. Robin and Bernard, back to back, are surrounded by cult members, and Bernard tells Robin to tell Tim Drake that if Bernard doesn't survive, to find Tim, tell him that he wishes they could have finished their date. Bernard calling their meet-up a date galvanizes Robin, and the enemies are quickly dispatched. Afterwards, Tim, while talking with Detective Williams, is told by the detective, "I know what you're going through. I've been through it too. You're holding too tight to a version of yourself you think you have to fit. Let go. You can figure out what you want along the way." Tim takes the advice on board and thinks of what he wants in that moment. He wants to see Bernard. He tells Bernard that he doesn't know what Bernard means to Tim yet, but he'd like to figure it out. In response, Bernard asks Tim out on a date, which Tim agrees to. As a piece of trivia, Oracle's first speech bubble refers to Drake, a superhero name Tim chose to go by during Brian Michael Bendis' short-lived run on the Young Justice comic in 2019. She also refers to Red Robin, a superhero name he had from 2009 to 2011 in the self-titled Red Robin comic. With Bruce Wayne sullen and sulking in the Batcave following the events of Fear State, a Scarecrow-centric story, Tim seeks a way to bring Bruce back to his usual confident, unflinching superhero self. Through it all, Tim worries that even though he's found happiness in his relationship with Bernard, he's waiting for the other shoe to drop, a feeling many closeted queer people experience when they begin to understand their sexuality, but before they are open with their loved ones about who they are. Conflicted with emotion, Tim has a heart-to-heart with his figurative older brother, Dick Grayson, aka Nightwing, who tells Tim that Bruce can never be truly happy or satisfied, and that it's up to Tim to find his own path to happiness, away from Bruce's legacy as Batman, much like he did when Dick became Nightwing. Tim takes Dick's message to heart, taking Bruce to a church that runs a shelter and soup kitchen, where he and Bruce, as Batman and Robin, engage with those affected by the events of Fear State, with Batman even embracing and apologizing to some of the Gotham citizens for his failures. Afterwards, full of Christmas spirit and renewed commitment to trying to improve the simplest aspects of the lives of the people of Gotham City, Bruce and Tim sit atop a building overlooking the Gotham skyline. Bruce acknowledges Tim's coming out as queer/bisexual, potentially, and his openness about his relationship with Bernard with one simple word: good. From there, Tim offers Batman the gift of a special first aid kit to help him repair his injuries when no other Bat family heroes are present, a callback to an earlier scene in the story where Bruce attempts to stitch up his own wound. Bruce accepts the gift and after a beat tells Tim, "You don't have to try to make me happy. I am happy because you're my son." And with that, Batman offers up the perfect response to Robin's coming out: simple acceptance and love. He makes it clear in his acceptance of Tim's gift and his expression of paternal love that he sees Tim as the same hero and person he was before Tim's coming out, and that their relationship will continue to thrive with Tim's out truth in the open. There's also reference made to Bernard's difficult parents, which gets explored further in Meghan Fitzmartin's Tim Drake Robin series, specifically in issue 7. The Elephant in the Room. The Elephant in the Room was an original published story at the end of the original Tim Drake Pride special, the only story not previously published in another comic. Tim and the two other Young Justice members, Connor Kent, aka Superboy, and Bart Allen, a speedster called Impulse, deal with a spectral elephant rampaging through the city. Tim pieces together the elephant is a reference to The Stolen White Elephant, a lesser-known detective story by Mark Twain. Once the pieces were in place, getting rid of the strange creature was easy. It left Tim excited, however, because there was finally an enemy who was just as interested in detective work as he is, or at the very least, they had an appreciation for the intellectual challenge it posed. It was the equivalent of one academic admiring another, but while Tim may be happy to have something of a peer in his new foe, it doesn't bode well for the future. The fact that the issue ended without Tim getting a real clue as to who this person is signifies that the story is far from over. During the story, Tim is avoiding Steph to not have a difficult conversation, but the Batgirls, Stephanie Brown and Cassandra Cain, stumble across the battle with the White Elephant. Over the course of the story, they both relay the ways they are hurting. Steph because Tim's treating her like a work buddy, not like one of her best friends. Tim concerned about finding the right way to articulate his feelings about Steph. In the end, they realize they'll always have each other's backs and can still be friends. The story ends with Tim introducing Steph to Bernard, ending on a happy note. For more Stephanie Brown, read Batgirls by Becky Cloonan, which we are covering in the second half of 2024 in one of the comic clubs. Special Delivery, Story and Art by Travis Moore, with colors by Enrica Aaron Angliolini and letters by Ariana Maher. Travis Moore has done a lot of cover artwork in recent years for Tom Taylor's Nightwing and Superman Son of Kal-El comics, as well as the main Wonder Woman book and Aquaman. He also worked on Fables, The Wolf Among Us, and co-created and illustrated the saucy Image comic Sins of the Black Flamingo. Be warned, some great art in that book, but some very 18-plus content. Enrica Aaron Angiolini has been a colorist for a number of comics, including Titans Comics' 13th Doctor Who comics, Warhammer 40,000 comics, and a handful of other DC comics. In the story, Tim Drake races to meet up with his new boyfriend Bernard so they can attend their first Pride together. Cake and criminals ensue. Similar to the Connor Hawke story, Tim has an internal dialogue running inside his head throughout the events of the story as he articulates his feelings about Bernard and how the relationship has had a positive, transformative impact on his life. The reader gets snippets of how their relationship is slowly progressing, both the ups, like holding hands for the first time in a cinema, and the downs, like standing Bernard up at an ice rink, probably due to crime fighting. The villains Tim runs into in the story, Micro and Macro, are minor villains that have made one minor appearance in Robin Volume 2, issues 164 and 165 in the late 2000s. The story ends with Bernard seeing the battle-damaged cake that Tim has baked and saying, "It's perfect. I love it, flaws and all. It was definitely worth the wait," symbolic of how he feels about Tim and their relationship in that moment. My personal thoughts on this story are, to say that I love this story is an understatement. The relatability and the fears, the self-doubt, the anxiety of not feeling good enough is palpable in the writing, and the warmth and the joy of being accepted was just beautifully done. The artwork glows in this story too. The way light emanates around the characters in different ways, in different situations, like whether they're at the beach or in the dark of the cinema, or the twinkle lights in the panel depicting their first date. This is the story in this book that sells that Tim/Bernard actually work as a pairing. You can actually feel Tim's happiness and lightness among the introspection, and he's closer to inner peace than he's been in a long time. Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy in The Hunt. Written by Danny Fernandez and art by Zoe Thorogood, with Jeremy Lauren on colors. Danny Fernandez is an actor and writer. Her most famous role to date was playing a show host in Ralph Breaks the Internet. A couple of years before DC Pride 2022 came about, Danny had a meeting with DC where she told them she wanted to either write a Harley Ivy story or a Diana Wonder Woman story, as those characters were dear to her heart. She was a big Batman animated series fan and loved the Schumacher/Clooney Batman movie. Danny went and worked on writing for a couple of WB projects and had connections to the Harley Quinn animated series development team, and a couple of years later, WB/DC reached out to Danny's management asking her to write a Poison Ivy/Harley story for DC Pride. Her aim in this was primarily to let the two characters have fun. Harley and Ivy are playing a game of prey vs. predator which gets interrupted by a mimic, which feeds on their darkest thoughts and relationship insecurities. The story explores how the pair were before they found each other, represented by the mimic wearing their older, iconic outfits, and how they could have stayed if they hadn't found love. As a trivia note, they made sure that the ways that Ivy tied Harley up with their vines were accurate to types of rope bondage and BDSM knots as a tip of the hat so that those who know. So if that was something you were into, you'd be able to clearly identify the ropes and types of wraps being used, but if you aren't aware, it just looks like she's caught up in vines. I don't think it ended up in the final version, but at one stage there was a scene in the comic script where Danny wanted the illustrators to do a sweeping kiss like Morticia and Gomez in the end scene of the 90s Addams Family movie. My personal thoughts on this story were that similar to the Batwoman issue, it suffers that there weren't enough from not having enough pages for setup to make an actual story. You're getting an excerpt. The emotions behind the women being able to identify when the mimic is impersonating their loved ones is great, but it doesn't feel like a particularly important beat for either of them. The author definitely intended to explore the idea of them experiencing unconditional love, but self-doubting that they were worthy of it, because that's what they've both been told in the past. But I don't know that it quite landed for me, and I think Special Delivery did a better job exploring the idea of self-doubt and that feeling of being worthy to be in a healthy relationship. It feels more like one of those situations where editorial could have gone, we have to make sure there's big characters in this anthology to balance out the less knowns, but we don't have the space to give them a proper story. And while the art is cute, it's a little inconsistent in how the faces are drawn, the muting of the color gradient dulling the story slightly. Are You Ready for This? By Danny Law and Ivan Cohen, Brittany Williams, Enrica Erin Angiolini, and Ariana Maher. Non-binary Earth 11 speedster Jess Chambers, Kid Quick, tries to prove themselves as a hero, trying to keep the Australian villain Sebastian Flinders, aka Shimmer, from taking Dr. Midnight's glasses from a display case on a Pride parade float. The rest of the Fearsome Five rock up, and Teen Justice, a obvious play on Young Justice and Teen Titans, rock up. The Fearsome Five are defeated, Teen Justice stand on a parade float, and Raven slips into the crowd, saying they can't join the Titans, an homage to previous main continuity comics. Personally, this story didn't quite work for me. The majority of these characters are just gender reversed versions of the main continuity ones, which is hardly an original concept, and the two teams worth of characters are flung at the reader with little time to figure out how they might differ from the original versions and might warrant spending more time with outside of a flirty blush between Troy and Raven. And Kid Quick has a lot of the same overstimulated, overactive personality traits as the main continuity's Impulse, which definitely takes more time to warm up to. This is very much set up as a teaser for the 6-issue Multiversity Teen Justice series that followed it. Finding Batman by Kevin Conroy, with art by Jay Bone and Aditya Bidikar. Kevin Conroy, for those who don't know, is the most iconic voice actor of Batman. The story is how his life as a gay man and thespian in the 20th century prepared him to take on the role of Bruce Wayne and Batman in the 90s Batman the Animated Series. Kevin would go on to voice Batman until 2022 in video games, including Multiversus, 3 of the Batman Arkham games, and the upcoming Suicide Squad game, among others. He would voice Bruce Wayne and Batman in animated shows like Bruce Timm's Justice League Unlimited, The Zeta Project, Static Shock, Teen Titans Go, Justice League Action, Superman the Animated Series, Scooby-Doo and Guess Who, and Batman Beyond, as well as multiple DC animated direct-to-DVD specials. Kevin Conroy voiced Batman opposite iconic 1960s Batman actor Adam West in the Batman animated series, and voiced an alternate version of Batman opposite Diedrich Bader's Batman in 2 episodes of Batman the Brave and the Bold. Kevin Conroy got to portray the character once in live action, portraying Bruce Wayne of Earth 99 in the Batwoman episode of the Arrowverse crossover Crisis on Infinite Earths. Kevin Conroy passed away from cancer in November 2022, 4 months after this story was published. DC made this story free on the DC Infinite app as tribute to Conroy. Conroy posthumously won the 2023 Will Eisner Comic Industry Awards for Best Short Story. My personal favorite stories, top 6 stories of this anthology, in order. At number 1, absolutely all of the Tim Drake stories, all of the little chapters together, and the number of pages that we got helped create a giant cohesive story. There's certainly more that I want to read and learn about in future installments, like how the breakup between Steph and Tim happened. And I also loved the series that we got, written by Meghan Fitzmartin, especially the second half of the series where the artwork really picked up with the likes of Serga Kuna stepping in for an issue. And I just want more of this relationship, more of this character. And I was also a really big fan of all of his pre 2011 content, as well as the James Tynion um, 2016 Detective Comics run that was done. And it all feels like the same character and the same core to the character, just with this new aspect of bisexuality added on. My second favorite story has to be the Connor Hawke one. Absolutely loved the music based villain. Absolutely loved the letter. It was all just impeccably done. And I absolutely loved the fact that it got continued in Titan's Beast World to a Star City. My third favorite was the Alyssa Wong story featuring Aqualad. Just impeccable art and just a really nice juxtaposition of the two different worlds that the characters of Hawiya and Aqualad are from, with the ocean and the desert, both in the writing and the art. Then in number 4, it's the Batgirl storyline. Really lovely and done. And just like the way they used Killer Moth, really good. And I just loved the subtle way of just having the trans colors on the bat and everything. Then my fifth favorite is the Jon Kent story with the cape, and just also teaching Damian Wayne, and by extension younger readers, a little bit about Pride Parade history. And then, yeah, my sixth favorite was just the noir aesthetic, basically, of the Far Sector Sojourner Green Lantern storyline. And my favorite standalone piece of artwork was the Galaxy and Dreamer piece of art. Absolutely beautiful.